Good afternoon and welcome to Sandown International Raceway for the 30th running of this circuit's long-distance classic, the Sandown 500. There's an enthusiastic crowd at Sandown this afternoon, even more so because the local hero, Peter Brock, has put his Holden Commodore on pole position. It's been 8 years since Brock's taken pole position here at Sandown. It's his 9th pole position in the history of the race. Brock also has won the race on 9 occasions, but his 10th win is by no means assured because yesterday's pole position was set in wet weather. Now, in dry weather, it was the Ford Falcons that set the pace, and John Bowe, driving Dick Johnson's Falcon, in fact became the only touring car driver ever to lap this circuit in under 1 minute 13 seconds. So the stage is set for a classic confrontation between Holden and Falcon. There's also a race within a race. The production cars are also racing in the Sandown 500, and yesterday it was Gary Walden's Mazda RX-7 which took pole in that division by only 0.02 of a second from Neville Crichton's BMW M3. The rain yesterday created mayhem during practice, but when the mist cleared, it was 2 Commodores on the front row of the grid, the veteran Brock and the 27-year-old Australian touring car champion Mark Skaife alongside him. But back on the second row of the grid is the burly ex-Formula One champion Alan Jones, the most aggressive man in touring car racing. So with Will Hagan in central commentary, Will, the stage is set for a fireworks display on the opening lap.
It certainly is, because there were very fluky conditions yesterday for what is traditionally a very fluky race. We've seen for the last 3 years very difficult weather conditions in the Sandown 500. This year the race built up, accepted by the teams, incorporated into their planning and budget on a much bigger scale than before. It's almost in the leading end of the field, a Bathurst grid forming there, with the addition, as John Smales was saying, of the production cars. But traditionally it's been a really curious race, and Howard Marsden, it's one that doesn't fall often to a pattern, does it? It's been a crazy one sometimes.
It really has. We hope now that the Melbourne weather has settled and that won't play part of the race meeting. 161 laps. The teams are going to divide it logically into 3 lots of about 54 laps and then come home at the end. And they're going to sprint the whole way. So you're going to see possibly 9 cars can win this particular race on the day. But, and here comes the but, there are going to be cars going off the circuit, there are going to be accidents, there are going to be pace cars out there. And so each of the senior teams now have got a technician and a tactician, and they're going to put a program together we'll try and follow for you. You're going to see a hell of a race today. I think you should sit back and settle and enjoy it.
Particularly as the production cars, although they're travelling some 12 seconds a lap, and it might be 15 seconds a lap with full fuel and a fully loaded car in the opening laps, as we look now at the Sandown facility, although it's that sort of gap, and they will be lapped many times by the other cars in the race, and drivers at the meeting this morning were very worried about it and getting past. They're coming out in front of this great Sandown grandstand, and the atmosphere here is unlike any other in Australia, because as the field roars down almost at maximum speed in front of them down this straight at the moment with a pit walk going on, and many of the spectators down there and getting close to their heroes as they roar past there, and this grandstand reverberates to the roars of the cars coming by and the spectators cheering their heroes, and particularly their Melbourne heroes, people like Peter Brock. Then it's a really marvellous sight and sound and feel. And it is a quite special race, as you can see there with Peter Brock. And he is the hero of touring car racing. Within the field, he's another of the guys. And but to the people outside, he is the name. And of course, he's been honouring that heroic adulation in recent times, because he's carted off $10,000 for the fastest lap at the press day at Mount Panorama, August 23. He's taken pole position here, and people like Mark Skaife, the current Australian touring car champion and the man whose team, commanded by Fred Gibson, very much the team to beat these days. They work hardest at it of any of the teams. And Jim Richards there, his co-driver, not mad keen to do a lot of testing, but a very formidable combination. And as you'll see when we come later to the grid positions, a grid that has a lot of sorting to do in the opening laps. But another vital part of this Sandown race always, as I said, it's fluky and it's seen lots of problems in the past. Down in the pits is Ian Campbell looking after all of those eventualities.
But let me tell you, it's no exception for the 1994 30th running of the Sandown race in pit lane. Fred Gibson is quoted in the papers in recent weeks as saying that the reason he didn't do well at Sandown last year was because he missed the 500. There's been a lot of pit practice over the last few days, and the other interesting thing is the stacks of tyres that are down there. Every conceivable tyre in the main team pits. The weather here is unpredictable. So far we've had a little mist earlier on. It's quite warm today, but this is Melbourne. Anything's a possibility.
And in the pits, or rather where he really loves to be, is Peter Brock, signing autographs on the pit walk, which is a unique Sandown activity, and it works very well. Brocky, do you really enjoy this?
Look, I think if you're a professional sports person, if you don't enjoy people, you're in the wrong game. I mean, because life becomes a real aggravation. No, I enjoy it.
Peter, this could be the year of the perfect 10 for you. 10 at Sandown and then 10 at Bathurst. What sort of pressure is on you, knowing full well that you've got the car this year that can give you that 10th victory?
Look, I always take life as doing what you best can do at that moment. Like, just give it your best shot and let everything unfold. And I've tried to get that sort of thinking through to the team. Give it your best shot, enjoy it, and the result will come.
Yesterday in qualifying, you took pole position by being so fast out of that pit row and getting your time before the rain really bucketed down. Was that planned or was it an accident?
Oh no, I figured that I wanted to get out early, but I actually set my fastest lap on the 5th or 6th lap actually on the track. So it was a matter of, I think, conditioning, reading the track, and I suppose you could say a bit of experience, because really the track conditions could only get worse. If they got better, hey, fine.
Peter, you've got 27-year-old Mark Scaife alongside you at 49?
Yeah.
Veteran status, does it sit well with you or not?
Oh yes, I mean, you're only as old as you feel, and the chronological sort of issue is one that the media, of course, focus on. I tend not to. I often get surprised when I see an old photograph. And I got young Craig Lowndes there with us this weekend, and Craig said, I wasn't born when that photograph was taken. It's rather astonishing, actually.
Peter, I don't think in 10 years I've ever seen you as motivated and enjoying yourself as much as you are now. What's the secret?
Well, I think one of the major things would be getting back with HRT. You know, they've got the support of the factory, Mobil, Telecom, Bridgestone, Qantas, those people, and they make an enormous difference to how a team thinks, because they know that they've got some substance behind them. And I think the team now believes in themselves. So they give me the best car they can. Now, you know, it's a very easy thing to reciprocate that sort of feeling they're giving me.
There's been pit talk that you're coming into the team as destabilised Thomas Mazzera a little bit. Is there any truth in that?
Well, I can't answer that one, but I do know that my coming into the team certainly stabilised HRT. And, you know, I would think that Thomas is probably feeling now that he hasn't got the pressure of having to perform as he did last year, and I think that's probably reflected by his clean driving record this year, and I really think probably the opposite's the case.
I'm asking the question obviously well before the event, but a 10th victory here, a 10th victory at Bathurst, and a 50th birthday in February next year, it's a perfect recipe for retirement. Is that in your mind at all?
No, it's not. It does sound pretty good on paper. But I've got a commitment to the sport for a little while yet. I believe I've got a bit to put back into it, and I intend that during my next year that I'll be endeavouring to put a lot more back into the sport as sort of like a, you know, thanks for everyone for what you've done and to nurture some young talent.
Wonderful idea. What's it going to take to win today?
I think taking it cool more than anything else. I mean, it's very easy to get carried away with the moment, and I think it's just a matter of getting into a groove and just trying to nurse that car along. I mean, 500k at Sandown is absolutely as hard, if not harder, than 1000k at Bathurst, and we forget that every year. And you see an enormous amount of mechanical fragility here at Sandown, and we're aiming to win this one.
Peter Brock, best of luck. We leave you to your fans.
Thank you.
Upcoming is the Australian Sports Sedan Championship. As well as the Sandown 500 today, the Australian Sports Sedan Championship is being decided. It is the last and final round, and the cars are forming up on the grid now.
Warming up with the anticipation of another thrilling 500-kilometre race here. Started in 1964, 29th of November, with Dr. Roberto Bussanello, Paddy Hopkirk, Rano Aaltonen, other top international drivers and the cream of Australian touring car motor racing in those days. Some massive cars, some crazy cars. A boxy Alpha that won the race in the hands of Roberto Bussanello. And today we see a very different race to what we'll see in any other endurance races this year, because we're seeing the top field of Australian Group A V8 touring cars, the Falcons and the Commodores, joined by a very feisty little group of production cars. This is the way they will shape up on the grid. There are 29 cars to grid. This is row 15, David Sala and Swain on the rear end, followed then by Murray Carter, you can see there, with Terry Sawyer in position 28, and that is the 13th row of the grid, and Danny Bogut, the Mazda 626, worth watching. He goes well with Ian Sawtell. Then further forward of that, the international driver, he's competed here twice before in sports cars, a Porsche and a Tom Walkinshaw Racing Jaguar, Jan Lammers from the Netherlands, with Kent Youlden in the Volvo, the Turbo T5 850, and Keith Carling and Kevin Burton have got one of the ex-Mazda team cars, now with Falcon tyres. Then you see Cameron McConville, that was in one of the V8 Falcons with the Dick Johnson team last year, Chris Smurden with him, Brett Youlden, Kent's brother, and Steniken in a Commodore VL, one of the older Commodores. And then Daily Planet Racing, John Trimble and Steve Harrington. Harrington's is a good talent, and Trimble is learning the trade. Blythman and Renshaw in their Commodore VP just in front of them. Forward of them, Don Watson Transport. Don Watson's got something like 35 Mercedes-Benz trucks, and with love, learning the trade and loving. In fact, Larry Perkins built car earlier this year, and then Stephen Richards in one of the slower, in terms of qualifying, production cars. I don't think it'll be that slow in the race. The Valvoline Porsche 968, owned by Father Jim and being joined by the veteran Gary Rogers for this race. And then forward of them, the Group Motorsport Commodore VL of Ayu and Conway, with Kevin Waldock, the very outgoing explosives expert in the Playscape Racing Falcon EB, with Mike Preston, who's been in the Holden team and in fact was there 1 year ago. Forward of them, and look how far back they are, a desultory result, a very disappointing one for the Shell FIA Racing team. Alan Grice, Dick Johnson, Steve Johnson, Junior Johnson as he's been called, Father Dick and John Bow. Look for them storming through the field as they try to make up positions early in the race. At least Dick doesn't have the problem that he's had previously of starting from pole and failing to finish. Perhaps he can reverse that sort of fate. Bob Jones and Troy Dunstan, again, good talents in a VP Commodore, and they've served up some very good results for Ampol in that car. Glenn Seaton with Paul Radicic, a great touring car star from Britain, destined for a Formula One test section, and like the Johnson team, disappointed bitterly to be so far back on the grid. Neville Crichton's brought out his little production car BMW M3 and joined by the young gun Mark Brame out of his Suzuki Swift GTI, in which he's done so well, a fabulous production car runner, and very close indeed to the BP Mazda Motorsport entry of Gary Walden, not a once a year, but infrequently driving these days, but a great talent, and Colin Bond with him, and they're doing a marvellous job and should have a race-long dice. Forward of them, Greg Crick and Tony Scott. Greg Crick, the Honda dealer from Launceston in Tasmania and Targa Tasmania winner on a couple of occasions. Tony Scott, the production car racing man, learning Group A racing with him. Then Larry Perkins and Greg Hansford. The men conquered the mountain last year at Bathurst for Castrol Perkins Racing Team, the victors in the Tooheys 1000, and also previous victors here. Win Percy out of retirement and back from England to join Coca-Cola Racing, Wayne Gardner's team, with the great talent Russell Ingall, Australian, who's been resident in Britain for a number of years with a star-studded single-seater career over there. And then Wayne Gardner, the man spending the money and doing it very well in a team that's as well turned out as anybody here today, Coca-Cola Racing, and joined by his number 2 driver through the Touring Car Championship, Neil Crompton. Once again forsaking the microphone, Diet Coke Racing sees Paul Morris, joined by Jeffrey Brabham. Jeffrey Brabham in the Glenn Seaton team, winner of this race last year. Paul Morris in charge, bit behind his team leader, and in fact sharing that row of the grid with the Holden Racing team's second car, Brad Jones and Craig Lowndes. Great talent Lowndes, and Jones too has been going extremely well in the car and is very fired up to try to prove that he deserves more than a couple of drives a year. Then we get towards the front row of the grid. There's Tony Longhurst, who's been in 2-litre racing this year and of course won the championship for the Benson and Hedges racing team. Charlie O'Brien's down from Queensland to join him, fresh out of his NASCAR and Oscar racing, but heading them on the grid is the Peter Jackson racing team, EB Falcon of Alan Jones and David Parsons. And then Mark Scaife, Jim Richards, the Winfield Racing Commodore VP, headed off though by the star of the moment, Peter Brock, who'll start on the inside of the front row of the grid for the Holden Racing team, and Thomas Mazira backing him up. And I don't think there's instability there. I think Thomas Mazira has got something to match and is willfully and willingly accepting the challenge. So that's the way the cars will line up for this Sandown 500, a race with 30 years of history. And there's, I was going to say the brooding, concentrating Brock, but it's cool cucumber Brock. And listening to him down there on the grid, Howard Marsden, he's a master, isn't he? Both of saying the right thing, but also of relating to the fans. And I suppose he knows what this motor racing entertainment business is all about.
Yeah, I was really quite touched with the way that he was handling the youngsters out there earlier on. I mean, it is Father's Day, and it was really quite apt that he should be doing such a good job.
Pit lane there.
The weather you can see in the background from the longer shot, it's not all over, this weather change that might hit us here in Melbourne today, but we think that's clear. We don't think it's going to become part of the race meeting, and in fact it's an important part of what you see on the grid today is that the Falcons have not been showing at all on the front of the grid.
Alan Jones' car, in fact, has a problem here that the Peter Jackson team are trying to solve. You can see some leakage there of fuel, and they're trying to get to the bottom of this. It was the 5th fastest car in the warm-up this morning, but a problem now for the car on 3rd grid position, and their world champion racing driver, 1980. And Alan Jones, and what a fiery, fierce man he was in Formula One. And one might say too in touring cars. Interesting to look at the morning warm-up, in fact, because remembering that people like Dick Johnson, way down there on the grid in something like 15th grid position, fastest man in the warm-up was the John Bowe. Dick Johnson, car number 17, at a 14.8847. Followed by Tony Longhurst, Charlie O'Brien, Mark Scaife, Jim Richards were 3rd fastest, Glenn Seaton, Paul Radisich were 4th, Alan Jones, David Parson 5th. This was the short warm-up session early this morning when the track wasn't fully dry. That's why the times are about a second outside the pole position time of last year. Thomas Mazira, Peter Brock, Wyn Percy, Russell Ingall. So Brock car, 6th fastest only in the warm-up this morning, a 15.77, 9/10 of a second slower as we come back there to the leading production car. And there the two of them are, the BMW M3 of Neville Crichton, Mark Brame, and also the Mazda Motorsport car of Gary Walden, Colin Bond, and then Dick Johnson back there. And with the second team car, Alan Grice, who's doing the 1st and 3rd stints, Steve Johnson in the middle one. And back then to Jim Richards' Porsche in the hands of son Stephen, another of the production cars. John Trimble, the Daily Planet Commodore that he's trying to sort out, the ex-Mazda Motorsport car now in Falcon Tyres' hands. And then the Volvo, Jan Lammers, running in the production class ahead of Murray Carter in the pink and blue and white, and every other car in the Danny Bogart Mazda 626. So that's the grid. A very interesting and mixed one, but to look back again at the warm-up this morning, Wyn Percy, Russell Ingall was 7th, Alan Grice, Steve Johnson were 8th, Kevin Waldock, Mike Preston 9th, Greg Crick and Tony Scott 10th, and in with Larry Perkins we will be, because we have a camera aboard, and no better man to be with. A wonderful individualist. The dinner at his workshop the other night shows that Larry is not the financial battler that people think. He's got his new Cessna 210 in the end of the workshop, perched on the edge of Moorabbin Airport. But he is a very, very heady bloke and cluey businessman, and if he were in America or Britain, I'd say he'd be making millions a year, because he knows how to build engines, he knows how to build cars. He's a no-nonsense man. He doesn't go on with a lot of guff, and he gets straight to the point. He charges the right sort of prices. He delivers good machinery, and a lot of drivers here and at Bathurst are using both cars that he's built and engines that he's put together.
Just coming back to the car 30, the Alan Jones car on the second row of the grid, they've still got the boot up, and they're still trying to clean up that fuel leak that's in the back. I believe they're possibly overfilled, and sometimes if you don't have the pressure relief valves properly organised on those tanks, you can actually get spillage out of the main filler. There's not a lot of panic going on there, so I think they're going to be all right. Jones is certainly very relaxed at the front.
Just looking back down through the morning warm-up, Paul Morris, Jeff Brabham were 13th, Brad Jones, Craig Lowndes were 14th, Larry Perkins was only 16th, and the best of the production cars was the Gary Walden Colin Bond Mazda, 21st fastest on a 27.436 by comparison with the Neville Crichton Mark Braham BMW 3305. Now they then had to pull it in, they were getting brake shudder, and replaced some discs on the car, so they were obviously capable of more. They didn't do all the morning session. Behind them was Stephen Richards, Gary Rogers and the Porsche 968, immediately behind them in the production car battle, and Murray Carter was behind them, Jan Lammers in the Volvo. 29 cars to start here at Sandown, 3.1 kilometres around, 161 laps. It's a 500 kilometre race, not so much as a warm-up to Bathurst, only really in terms of pit crews operating and getting that sort of act into order. It's a much tougher place here on tyres, it's a much tougher place on brakes, and a much tougher place on drive lines and transmissions. It's one of the reasons that Fred Gibson's only running one car. He said the other one is Bathurst ready. I only have one to prepare, and I'm happy to be here because it's a damn good warm-up for everybody in terms of the drivers doing a race, but not necessarily replicating in any way the Bathurst circuit. And it's now 4 weeks from Bathurst instead of what it's often been, and that's been 3.
Right, the first part of the race is going to be between 50 and 55 laps for each one of these Group A cars in the front. They can get their fuel consumption out to that particular distance. They'll go very hard. They don't expect to have to change anything other than tyres and fuel and drivers in that first 55 lap session.
Marvellous feel. Listen to the violence and the harshness in Larry Perkins' car. That is a marvellous, realistic, exactly replication of what it's like in those cars. You can hear those bangs are gear changes. Those bangs are gear changes, just bash through all the time. Then you can hear all the metal rattling. I often say how violent it is in the cars. I suspect some viewers think we're exaggerating. It's hell on wheels. It would make you sick, wouldn't it? Imagine 4 hours of that. That's what they're heading for.
And that's just cruising around.
Yeah, that is cruising around. Yeah, well said. It is so noisy. It's so violent. It gets so hot that you have to be a very special person even to want to be in there, much less to cope with the conditions and try to drive the cars to their maximum. As they come round now and form up on the grid of a race with a great history, really has had, often drawing bigger crowds than they used to get to Bathurst. Went into a decline for a little while, but this today is very definitely the return in full-blooded form of the Sandown 500. Big crowd, great quality in the field, marvellous diversity with the production cars joining them, and the crowd enthralled with the prospect of the 161 laps, the 500 furious kilometres of this Sandown 500, about to burst into action with the local hero Peter Brock on pole position, with Mark Scaife joining him. Second row of the grid, the second Holden Racing Team car. Going on, that's on the third row, of course, it's Alan Jones. Takes third grid position in car number 30, now rectified, everything in order and ready to go. And with Tony Longhurst beside him. Then it's the second Holden Team car. And that's Brad Jones in car number 15 with Paul Morris to his right. Following then is Wayne Gardner in car number 4 with Wyn Percy to his right as Larry Perkins gets ready in the car that won Bathurst last year. Sensational sound. And Gary Walden back there on 6th grid row in car 70, the BMW M3 car number 9 with Neville Crichton doing the opening stint in that car. So all now in readiness. And look for the production cars being overhauled. Up there quite high in the field, look 2 for the big V8s booming from behind, trying to barge and bash and force their way through as they get underway now in this Sandown 500. It's a great start for Wayne Gardner. He's soaring through and he's up into 5th place in a race being led though by Mark Scaife. Off pole position and raising cement dust as he covers the first corner well and ensures that Peter Brock, who was on pole position, who's now back to 3rd, can do no better than that. And that's a great jump and a start for Mark Scaife. As you can see further back, the field wending its way through in the BMW M3 of Neville Crichton, already losing an enormous number of places as the big V8 storm by. And look at Mark Scaife storming away ahead of the rest of the field.
Jones did very well to come through from the second row there. Very aggressive push through the centre between Brock and Scaife, but long distance race, it doesn't matter. They're settled now. Clean run, which is great. And
Scaife has a lead of 0.97 of a second up the start of the back straight over Brock. Nearly a second gain in about 4 corners. Jones at least. So, look at this. Look at the pressure being put on by the two leading teams in touring car racing in terms of results. That's correct to say. And
the second of the Works Holden cars have run into the back of somebody, and obviously under brakes.
And so now across the start-finish line, 138.8 kilometres an hour average for Mark Scaife from a standing lap as they start storming through in the order of Scaife in car 2, from Jones in car number 30, Mazira in car 05 and Gardner in car 4. Then it's Longhurst in 25, Perkins in 11, he's come through well. As into the pits goes the second Holden race team car number 15 that started from 5th grid position, Brad Jones. Behind Longhurst is Perkins, as I said, then Paul Morris, Glenn Seaton in 1, Wyn Percy in 7, Dick Johnson in 17, he's up to 10th place. Gary Walden in the Mazda was still 11th at the end of the first lap as they storm now over the top, down the back straight towards Dandenong Road corner. And this is a motor race between the leading two, as you can see. Alan Jones, Mr. Aggression, out after Mark Scaife, Mr. Talent, Mr. Inform of Australian touring car racing this year, in the team that works harder than anybody, reputed to have the biggest budget, but they say no, we haven't. 2 others have bigger budgets than we just work harder. And indeed late yesterday in the final untimed non-qualifying session, it was they who were the ones that were out there still, while most others had packed their cars away in the garage, but streams of spray coming up from the car as they kept working at it.
We talked about a 500-kilometre sprint. They're certainly starting out that way. Scaife's on the limit under brakes, the car's weaving about under that condition, and Jones is in there pushing him.
So Alan Jones in 30, Brad Jones, of course, the driver of car 15 that had that pit stop early on in the race and has therefore dropped a long way back. Very bad luck for Holden Racing Team.
It's interesting.
Out now.
Sorry, I was just going to say, it's interesting to watch the exhaust on the 2 Winfield cars. They're running their cars very rich on fuel. You can see the black smoke under acceleration and a big lift-off flame from both of them. Interesting setting.
That's an interesting clump of cars too, my goodness. Really close together. The leading pair now being joined by Brock in the 05 car. So not far away. Then it's Larry Perkins heading the next bunch. He's in 4th place. So from being 10th in the morning warm-up, Larry Perkins is very definitely in good shape.
The man who's in the best position, I think, is Brock. He's in clear air. He's in 3rd position. He's allowing these 2 hard chargers ahead of him to push and shove. He's got much more experience than either of them in long-distance racing and sitting pretty at this stage.
Mark Scaife and Alan Jones. Single-seater and Larry Perkins. And look at the speed on the Speedo. Up over the top there at over 200, still doing 100 miles an hour. And now coming down to Dandenong Road corner. Look at him, still exceeding the speed limit over 100 kilometres an hour. An awesome sight and sound from inside the Peter Jackson car. Really is awesome. You just can't realise that they go so fast at places like that. would make people car sick, probably in a straight line. For most people, you can do everything there, Howard, but smell the fumes.
Which is great. That sort of noise really gives you an opportunity to understand how clever these boys are to be able to do that, and sometimes even talk on television as well.
1.6 seconds back to third place from the race leader here. Mark Scaife battling with Alan Jones. And in the order behind, it's Larry Perkins leading the next bunch with Wayne Gardner in car 4 behind him. He's in 5th. Tony Longhurst 6th in 25. Paul Morris 7th, the Diet Coke car. And we looked at him from Glenn Seaton's car number 1 just a moment ago when we got in the car with him. Dick Johnson's 9th in 17th, Wyn Percy is 10th in car number 7.
And isn't it remarkable, after only 4 laps, they're already lapping the back markers. This is going to be part of the race strategy that's going to come in. We mentioned it earlier on. These boys are racing as hard as they can, but there are going to unfortunately be touches, spins and pushes. And we are going to see cars coming out here under pace lap conditions. So, I mean, that sort of lock-up from a car that's going to do 500 kilometres of racing just gives you some idea of how keen all of these people are to get in and get at one another. Murray
Carter, the man, though, finding their way around, and Glenn Seaton was the man who raised it at the driver meeting this morning, and he was enormously concerned. He said there is an 80 kilometre-an-hour difference between our top speed and theirs, and our speed coming into a lot of corners, and he said we can't stop. We just can't stop to avoid them. If somebody pulls the wrong rein, we'll hit them. Brock is falling back from the leading pair because it's 1.57 seconds between him and second placed Alan Jones, going up to about 1 3/4 from the race leader to Brock, the man that was the fastest qualifier, from the man now leading the race, Mark Scaife, in number 2. Alan Jones, all about pressure.
These two are circulating in 1:15.1, and Brock slipped back to 1:15.6. So I think Brock is letting them go. He feels the pace is a bit too high at this very early stage in the race, and he's always a man to watch on long-distance races.
Gary Walden in the Mazda, now slipping to 21st place as the field sorts itself out. And Stephen Richards in the Porsche immediately behind, leading the production, well, second in the production car section of the race, but 22nd outright. But back behind the leading in top 10 is Alan Grice, Bob Jones, Greg Crick, Kevin Waldock, Smurden, Trimble, Watson, Youlden. And so all the quick boys have sorted themselves out from those aberrant grid positions and into the top 10 as this battle continues to wage. And it really is a fascinating one. Brock still third. Perkins is very close to him. Gardner's not far away, nor Tony Longhurst or Dick Johnson. So there's some very good quality and plenty of pressure. Glenn Seaton goes into 8th place in car 1. Paul Morris 9th in 23. Wyn Percy 10th in 7. Don't know what that does for your head. That's why racing cars race and road cars go on the road. Could you cop that lack of sound deadening and all that noise, vibration and harshness? So wonder they have a separate department for it in engineering and motor manufacturers. There are the top 6. And Larry Perkins, the man that we were just sharing the ride with in car number 11. He's in 4th. So a really interesting race to me at this stage as they come up now to lap Gary Walden. He's in 21st place, so that gives you some idea of how they're going in the production car. It's not so far behind. You saw Stephen Richards there being lapped too by the leading mob as they come storming through. No better people to let somebody by, and you'll see the Mazda stay to the outside his normal exit line and let the leading contenders come through, getting tighter in on him. He'll try and stay, I suspect, on the right-hand side of the track. Look at the distance they've pulled. Look, in a matter of only 500 or so metres, they've pulled more than 100, the leading stormtroopers, as they come up over the top now. Scaife, well and truly racing at what he thinks is his comfortable maximum, and Alan Jones putting on every bit of pressure that he can find to try and force Scaife into error or overusing the machinery.
and they're pushing one another. The lap time's coming down. They're now running at 1 minute 14.9, both of them. Brock's now come down to 1:15.1 that they were running previously, so he's decided that he doesn't want Larry any closer to him than he is. Interesting to see the lock of the brakes every time Scaife goes through there. They're not scared about bumping these cars over the grid on the outside edges of all the corners. The cars are tough. They know their cars very well indeed, and they just are pushing themselves and one another into as much trouble as they can.
Alan Jones flashes by 0.82 of a second now from Mark Scaife, and from saying that he was putting on all the pressure he could comfortably muster, it's the opposite now. Scaife, I think, just starting to pull tenths on him. Little but valuable tenths of a second to mount up to 0.82, and it's still there. They're just travelling slowly there, so the physical distance between them comes back. And you'll see it lengthen as they go up the straight, as they build up speed. Look how close Perkins is to Brock, and then Wayne Gardner, and then look at this battle too. Dick Johnson hitting that next little trio. The man who, for all 5 pole positions that he's had here, has never managed to win this race. And behind him, Tony Longhurst, and then Glenn Seaton. Boy, that's hot, close company. And Paul Morris. Dick Johnson sending out, in fact, John Bowe to start in the car, because he said, well, Bowe was trying to sort it out. He said, it doesn't make any difference to my rate of pay. But he said, I don't know if Dick didn't want to sort us out from the grid position we were on. He said, I'd love to have done the middle stint, just watch the pattern form and see whether Dick makes any mistakes and what I've got to do to respond. Whereas now, he said, it's all in my hands. And there you see a production car, Murray Carter, has been lapped by them twice now. And they've done only 9. They really will be fed up. For all that we like to see those cars there and as much variety as possible, they will have had more than enough of the production cars, probably by now, certainly by race end. It'll be interesting, and we'll no doubt see it many times, to see the speed differential as they storm up the back straight and go past some of the production cars. Scaife just drives it to the outside of the track to hook up to widen the entry to that left-hander there. And Alan Jones, forgetting that 0.82 of a second that he was behind, has linked it back up as they come to Jan Lammers in the Volvo. Another of the production cars, and remember that unlike the Mazda RX-7 or the Porsche 968 or the BMW M3, which is a pretty purpose-built little sporty sedan, this is a full luxury sedan with walnut dashboard. And here, notice the difference. Mr. Marsden, as an engineer, you were pleased to note that.
Yes, indeed, immediately. And Jan, you can see Jan is spending almost more time with his eyes in the mirror than he is driving the car. International professional, does not want to get involved in any accidents or any problems. And this is how people have to race, how difficult to get the most out of your car and still have to use your eyes the way that poor Jan is at the moment.
That's just a tremendous impression of both him keeping out of the way and off his line, now saying I can get over here to get this corner right, and seeing him working at the wheel, but how quickly the other cars go by, and even when they're offline they just stream away, and he says, I'm staying over here, boys, the left's the go for your life. And look at him, trafficators on, hasn't adjusted the radio, but the walnut dashboard's in fine fettle. And a man who's driven here in a very, very hot Le Mans type sports car, Porsche, but also in the TWR Racing Jaguars. And now in a very different vehicle today, a very plush saloon competing in the production car section.
Just interesting to watch Jan, this international Dutchman with wonderful English and an international opportunity to go anywhere, to come down to this country to drive a car like this with Kent Youlden, who's a good, fun Australian. They got on extremely well together. Their times were just about together. They sorted the car out together. Lovely to see that these sorts of things can happen.
I hope that he got a discount on his airfare. He only weighs 58 kilos. They should have given him at least another big suitcase. So, with Mark Scaife still being hounded by Alan Jones down in the pits, John Smales.
And, well, it would appear that the Alan Jones fuel problem might be ongoing. The Peter Brock car has reported to its pits that he's sliding all over the track on fuel that's being dropped by Jones in front. Rob Benson from HRT has been to the officials. They said they've looked at it, but they say other cars are dropping fuel early in the race as well, so they're not going to do anything about Jones's fuel problem. Brock is adamant that he's losing time and distance, and it's dangerous because of the fuel that Jones is dropping.
Too good a race to let it go with Mark Scaife, as you can see. Jones couldn't be closer, despite the fact of them charging their way through. And in fact, it's not just despite that, but to some extent because of it. Because it generally disadvantages the front runner. Not always, but generally that's the case. So in very close company, the leading pair, followed by Brock with about a 1 second buffer to Perkins. Very close company is Larry Perkins. You'll see him come in here in a moment. Larry Perkins with the Dick Johnson car, and that's John Bowe at the helm of it. And Larry is heading what's becoming a fairly furious little battle behind, and that's Wayne Gardner with John Bowe at 17. Don't forget that this touring car master of building them, of developing them, of sorting out sensible rules for them, was in 1976 in the BRM Formula One team. A man of enormous driving and engineering talent. Threaded through there, Danny Bogut and the other slow car very well indeed. And drove and engineered his car to Bathurst victory last year. Of course, he'd done it 3 times previously with Brock, as he's done this race. To victory with Brock too. Brock's last victory here was 1984, 3 years further back than his last Bathurst victory. And there's the man of whom we speak in 05, 3rd place. And 3.76 seconds in arrears to the leader. 1 second back to Perkins on the official count. 4.84 from Perkins to the race leader. 7.4 to Dick Johnson, and 0.26 of a second only to Wayne Gardner when they went across the start-finish line last time. Going backwards 1 place, Gardner into 6th. The John Bowe car, Dick Johnson, into 5th place, and that's hard-earned success from 15th grid position for John Bowe in 17. There he is, now 5th place. He's on a charge. Look at him. Got Gardner out after Perkins. Again, we say Alan Jones is a hard man and a pressure man. And Seaton went off in car number 1. So, Glenn Seaton again, the just deposed Australian touring car champion, who has such wretched luck, Howard Marsden, in long distance races. And I often find it sort of, oh boy, that was big trouble down there as well. Braking for the corner and a really big lockup as the line was taken. Have a look at Bowe here. And wow.
And there's nobody else around him. He seems to have gone off on his own.
So, as I say, 6-speed gearbox, but Seaton, one's reluctant to talk of luck as he discusses it now with his pit crew, the boss, the owner, the man in charge of the finances of the Peter Jackson team. An enormous responsibility for the young man who has had an awful season, and one has to say that he's made too many mistakes. In a sport that demands great accuracy, Glenn Seaton pressing on now, but with a tyre rubbing and a problem that can only get worse.
That's right. One of the criticisms of the front aerofoils of the Falcons is that they are vulnerable to taking damage, and that's exactly what's happened to young Glenn now. Coming in on the tyre shouldn't give him too much of a problem, so long as it's not giving a knife-edge cut to the outer corner of the rubber. He'll be talking with it with his pits. They'll be watching it on television. They'll see it, keep an eye on it, as will the officials. In the meantime, Glenn will keep pushing.
And he's in 11th place at this stage. He's just completed his 15th lap as of the race leaders. So So he's on the same lap still as the race leaders, but he has a tyre rubbing occasionally, and he's now behind. Scaife in the lead from Alan Jones, Peter Brock, Larry Perkins, John Bowe, Wayne Gardner, Tony Longhurst, Paul Morris, Wyn Percy and Alan Grice, the top 10, then Glenn Seaton.
The rub on that front right-hand tyre wheel, in fact, is halfway up the guard, which is a bad place for it to be. If it was just the lower area, which is a lot softer in material, it wouldn't matter so much, but that can be quite a concern for the team.
It's the sort of thing that makes you sick at heart. You're trying to organise the team. You want all the pit crew to work perfectly. You want your co-driver, your other cars' drivers to work perfectly, and you make the error.
And the balance of the car will now be hurt because the downforce that you get from the front of this aerodynamic package is enough to bring him in. They're going for a new part, they go for new tyres, they'll talk with Glenn, they might refuel, and they certainly should even this early so that he can pick up some time from another stop at another time. Sure there's no more damage. One of the problems is cooling to the brakes. If they've destroyed the duct that carries the cooling to the outside front right-hand brake, which is the brake that takes the most wear and damage, that would be a concern to the team over the long time.
11th when he was racing, when he'd resumed racing after that off, and now obviously falling way back further. And again, the difficulty of essentially the team manager being the man in the car. So he's doing two things now. He should be sitting there as a driver thinking, right, what will I do when I get back out? Aha. So now there's the problem. And we've said, you know, Glenn's made mistakes this year and he has had rotten problem. At the moment, he can't stop the car. It's not working properly. The brakes aren't anywhere near up to the mark as Paul Radisich, the man that won that touring car challenge at Monza last year. It's had a bit of a wretched time in the touring car championship in Britain this year, but still one of the really fast men. And this is the situation at Sandown, in the Sandown 500, with the race still being led by Mark Scaife, 17 laps completed, 0.37 of a second, in front of Alan Jones, followed by Peter Brock, Larry Perkins and Dick Johnson in 5th. Well, what a situation we have here now. The race leaders just changed at the end of, or the start of the 22nd lap. Alan Jones has gone through into the lead in car 30 to thunderous applause from the grandstand. He's taken it from Mark Scaife. So 22 laps completed and we have a new race leader. We also have a new third place. Look at him, John Bowe. John Bowe forced his way through on Peter Brock on the 20th lap, 24 minutes of racing. So 2.5 minutes ago. And there he is on the thrust, and there's a big off. And that's Gardner. I think that's Gardner in car 4, it is. So Wayne Gardner's gone off down where Glenn Seaton said he couldn't stop. And he's given it a harder and perhaps more serious smack. What probably saved Glenn Seaton was that he hit very squarely along the side of the car. But Gardner here, have a look. He's got everything locked up and on his own, whoomper on the left side of it. So he spun right round and hit the left side. Glenn Seaton hit driver's side.
And that will have got to his suspension, so he's going to have to come in to get the front end of the car realigned and reorganised.
Gardner was in 7th place at that stage in car number 4. And Alan Jones is pulling away. Scaife is now under threat from John Bowe. So suddenly the race is coming alight. Two of the leading contenders have had problems, and they're problems that undoubtedly will unsettle the car and induce greater tyre wear or less good lap times, probably through a couple of causes and certainly extra pit stops. And now we're seeing John Bowe in a real hurry. He's come from 15th grid position in car number 17, a car that's traditionally qualified very well here for Dick Johnson but never met with success. They were 15 laps from victory not so many years ago and ended up having a couple of problems and ended up in 5th place. But now they're presenting a very real threat. They want their way past Mark Scaife, and they particularly want to get out there with Alan Jones, the man in the real rush, at the head of the field, completing 22 laps now. Sorry, completing his 23rd, and with a lead of 1.5 seconds as John Bowe is second. So it's Falcons 1, Falcons 2, Commodore 3, Brock 4th, Perkins 5th, Commodore, Longhurst 6th, Commodore, Morris 7th, Commodore, Wynne Percy 8th, Alan Grice 9th, and Bob Jones, at least, in car 12, 10th. And there, the Wayne Gardner car.
Having to look at that front suspension to see how bad the damage is, whether the brake ducts have gone again, as we mentioned with the previous car. They've made a decision, wheels back on again. They should be refueling the car and get it back out there.
15.02 for Alan Jones on the last lap. Mark Scaife a 15.3, a 15.24 for Bowe in Dick Johnson's car 17 as Gardner comes back out again in car number 4. So wretched luck for a man in that Coca-Cola team like Glenn Seaton, the boss of his team, but he's got Alan Heafy back in the pits and very much organising the team, working out the strategy and giving him all the insight from years and years of touring car and long-distance racing experience to line up with the tremendous talent of Wayne Gardner, the 1987 500cc Grand Prix World Motorcycle Champion. Car not working. Going slowly, pulling offline, and I would think back to the pits, but we'll see. The production car category at the moment being led by Walden Bond, car number 70, 22nd position outright from Stephen Richards. Immediately behind them on the track, 23rd, the Crichton Mark Brame BMW M3, which will go quicker when young Mark Brame gets into it, but he's in 3rd place in the class. Then it's Carling in the 2nd Mazda RX-7, as we see the front end of the field now, and Larry Perkins there, 5th place in car number 11. Oh, look. Scaife saying, come on, if you've gone past me, keep going, don't hold me up.
Because look in my mirror.
Yes, look in his mirror indeed. Peter Brock.
Brock's times have dropped now. He's into the 14 seconds regularly, and the time, in fact, where they were settling into 15-second laps, they've now come down into the 14s, the more aggressive of the drivers. Over
the three of them, 7/10 of a second. Gardner back to the pits. Danny Bogut parked on the inside of the corner at the end of the straight. You might have seen a brief flash in the Mazda 626, but big problems for car number 4.
They don't know what they're looking for. They're having to pull wheels and they'll check and they have to make a decision. Alan Heafy will have to earn his money down there by feeding information back to Gardner about the decision on the car.
So already for these people, for Alan Jones leading the race, John Bowe in 2nd place, Scaife in 3rd, and they're harrying him. Peter Brock in 4th, Larry Perkins in 5th. Good news for them. Wayne Gardner's in trouble in car number 4. Glenn Seaton's been off. All that coming through to them from their pits and saying, OK, 2 more that aren't any longer possible contenders.
Right now at lap 25, we're actually halfway through the first of our about 50 lap races. We said the race at 161 total laps is going to get divided into 3 equal lots of about 50 to 55 laps. Now at 25 laps, they're still at one another very hard indeed. We've got to go the same distance again, another 25 laps before we get to the pits.
And car number 4 is down in 21st place, the Wayne Gardner, Neil Crompton Coca-Cola car. There you see the top 6 at the moment. And boy, they're racing long and hard. And don't forget Tony Longhurst back there in car number 25. He's not featured in anything. He stayed out of it. Haven't seen him lock a wheel. Haven't seen him get into any dices. Hasn't had the front of his grille covered by a car immediately in front. Just keeping it going well. And indeed in Oran Park, the last round of the Touring Car Championship, very quick there. Finally came unstuck in qualifying a little bit, but has a car that can travel as quickly as any of them. A car, incidentally, built and bought from built by and bought from Larry Perkins.
One of the problems for the front runners now is they're starting to come up on the 2nd rank of the Commodores and Falcons, which are virtually as fast as they are between the corners, but not as quick through the corners. And it's very difficult for the heroes to get past the second-ranked big cars.
Well, that's what we're seeing now. We've got a mix of slow V8s. They can really jump, though, when their operators get them pointed straight. But their corner speed will be low, and there's off.
That was Brock, I think.
Yes. So forced right onto the grass. He's still there. He's not far behind the car we're in. There you see him, storming Peter. Cool as a cucumber early in the race, suddenly now, different work at hand. Second gear. Third, fourth, fifth, sixth. I think I'm one ahead of myself.
Yeah, I hope number 7 doesn't come up.
Yeah, one it took as a change. It was just a bang under the car, but pretty good stuff. Three or four second gear corners for them. If you did that in the production in a road car and you heard that little crunch every time, Howard Marsden, you'd be worried, but they're a totally different type of gearbox.
Yes, on the road-going gearbox, you've got what is known as synchromesh to help you changing through the gears, and you don't have to match the engine and the road speed revs to get the gear through. These boys have got straight-cut gears, and they just push through with these very hard, short shifts. They do a little bit of a flip on the throttle, and they get through from that viewpoint. So it's metal to metal all the way, and that's the clonk and bang you can hear.
And tough, tough as anything, those gearboxes. Trimble, Larry Perkins round the outside of him.
The language will be running blue in that car.
As Larry passes another of his customers, he built 7 new cars this year for customers. He's got 3 new ones coming. Don't forget that by the beginning of the touring car season next year, we will be seeing VR Commodores race and EF Falcons. This is the second or third last race, probably, for these configuration motor cars, because despite what was originally said about the touring cars not being at the Adelaide Australian Grand Prix, they almost certainly will be. Dr. Mal Hemmeling told me on Friday when they had the Grand Prix announcement down here in Melbourne. It's nearly signed and sealed as we come back and have a look at Alan Jones with who's on him, the man who was 15th grid position, who is now second in the race, and I'll have a little wager he's about to lead. John Bowe. Fantastic hard-charging job done in 17 as we have our third race leader in the Sandown 500. As they complete 29 laps, they go out on their 30th. And Falcon battles Falcon as Alan Jones wants him back. There's the bearded boy on the right, the new race leader, and his team owner and manager Dick Johnson will be standing there saying the car's in very good hands.
It would look as though the Johnson cars have got more power than the Seaton cars. They are able to come through on both the front and the rear straights.
Dick Johnson said to me this morning, he said, in the dry, our cars are working fantastically. He said, really, we're very happy. He said, don't worry about the grid position. He said, if it's a dry day, and it looks like being, it's grey and overcast, and the mist that I expected to clear to a beautiful blue sky never did that. The sun gamely tried to peek through, but quite a ceiling of cloud all over, but I doubt that it'll rain through the day. But one never knows, and the forecast does suggest otherwise. And if it does, Ian Campbell down in the pits won't enjoy it.
No, I don't think I will. Will at this stage in time, it's still perfect conditions for racing here at the moment. At the production park, excuse me, end of the pits, we've had the Silas Wayne entry in. They've had exhaust problems in that car and also found an extra fan problem, so they've got the car back on the track. But the interesting comment comes from the crew chief from the Lammers car, the Volvo. I asked him what the problem was in the last turn coming in the main straight. He gritted his teeth and said he's just being a little too polite. However, we're hearing strong rumours now they're having turbo problems in the Triple M machine. Back to central commentary.
Well, bad luck if they are, because it's a car that we saw from the James Hardy 12R has enormous potential, and you must remember it's a four-door luxury sedan, not one of the little low sports coupes like the 968 or the RX-7. As we see John Bowe not only leading the race, but the only man to storm away from Alan Jones so far, Howard Marsden.
Yes, quite right. Just one thing for the viewers. You're seeing the lumps starting to be kicked up from the outside of the cars. Each one of these corners will get more and more black because the rubber that's being rolled off the centre of these large slick tyres pulls together and gets into this sort of offline problem. You must stay in the centre of your racing line. If you come offline, you get onto those lumps of rubber, you throw some out. They're very slidey, and it's one of the danger areas because when you have to come offline to get past a slow car, it really is a danger area. Something's going to get more and more part of this race as we go on.
That fastest lap of the day that was shown up there on John Bowe, just over the 1:14, well, he's just done a 14.85 on lap 31. Now, the car's admittedly lighter on fuel, but it's well down on tyres, and he's within, in other words, 0.8 of a second of the fastest lap done on the day by anybody, and the person that's done the fastest lap is he. So it's been a tremendous effort, and he's still driving it very, very quickly, and it says an enormous amount about the speed and the ability and the hard-charging coolness of John Bowe. We've talked of Alan Jones and of Brock and of Scaife and so on. Don't anybody underestimate the bearded little wonder in that car, because on his day he's as quick and as good as anybody. And don't forget, he's been an Australian both driving champion in single-seaters but also sports car champion. He can handle the fastest of machinery with the same sort of aplomb as we've seen him in this Falcon today.
Coming back to that tyre wear problem where they're running the rubber off the tyres, this first session of 50 to 55 laps is going to be the one that's going to be hardest on the rubber. Some of them may have to come in a little bit early because the cars may in fact lose too much of the tread that's available to them. But in the second session and third session, coming towards the end of the race, tyre wear in fact will slacken off because the rubber's on the road and their grip is not as high, and therefore the wear is not as high.
He's pulling a second a lap on Alan Jones. He's now 2 seconds away from him, as you can see there. 1.97 from first place Bowe to second place Alan Jones, and that was across the start finishing line on the last lap, just 2 laps since he took the race lead. So he really is in an enormous hurry, and I suspect, Howard Marsden, like your thoughts, that Mark Scaife in 3rd place in car 2, Larry Perkins 4th place in car 11, might be a little bit worried by the pace of John Bowe in 17.
They've certainly decided that it's too fast for them. They are capable of doing these times, but at the moment they said this is too much on the car. We're going for the longer distance race, and that's where the test distance is changing.
And heading that way, heading to the pits at about 20 laps. But with news down there at the moment, John Smales.
And Wayne Gardner has just stormed back into the motor race after losing 8 minutes and 19 seconds while his crew struggled to find what was wrong with the front suspension. What happened? His wheel actually hit the ribbon strip with such force that it punched a circlip straight out of the suspension. And it took all this time to find it. So 8 minutes and 19 seconds lost by Gardner. Incidentally, there have now been 3 spoilers changed in this race. Brad Jones took 1 minute and 24 seconds. Both Gardner and Seaton took 1 minute and 33 seconds each.
And Wayne Gardner in 28th place at this stage in car number 4. Glenn Seaton in 17th place in car number 1. The sort of fate that's befallen the 2 people who came unstuck just a little bit further on from here. This was Wayne Gardner territory where he locked and spun and whacked the fence. And it was a tad further on that Glenn Seaton just drove on, locked up, sideways into the fence too.
Gardner should be quite quick now because he'll be angry with what has happened. He's lost time, and it'll now be used as a test session with this particular race, and he'll push himself and his car as hard as he can to learn as much for the next race, which of course is Bathurst.
But John Bowe, 15.07 his last lap. Wayne Gardner at 20.5. So 4.8 seconds away from the gun time at this stage. But you're quite right. There's nothing now to be done other than to drive it and see if you can break it, and if you can't, what you can recover to. That's their only purpose in life from here on. Neil Crompton will be pretty disappointed. The pits, have a look there. Not a man doing a 120.5.
Exactly right. That was the first lap out, but this time lock up, cock it over, get that wheel up in the air and really get into it. The man is angry.
And in car 33 is a fair bit of trouble for David Sala, Steve Swain, the Holden Commodore VP. Recovered, and of course one of the production cars, nothing like the the aerodynamic kit or the power or the tyres or the brakes or anything else of the storming Group A Commodores and Falcons. Just its ride height alone gives it away, apart from all the external appearance.
You can see now how Gardner's coming up and having a push at the Dow Johnson car. Exactly what we said, he's just going to go flat from here on.
Glenn Seaton doing 15.8, 15.8.2. His last lap in car 1. In other words, he's lapping, well, I was going to say third or fourth fastest, but there are a few. There's Johnson and Jones and Scaife faster than he, lapping at the moment. Mazera, Longhurst and Morris, but he's lapping faster than Grice in 8th place, faster than Percy. Sorry, Percy in 8th place, Grice in 9th place, Bob Jones in 10th, and Wayne Gardner 28th, a 15.4. 15.4 Wayne Gardner. Well, Alan Jones has just done a 15.27 and a 15.12 to Paul Morris. Boy, oh boy. Car 23 in 7th place is really flying. Gardner has just done 4th fastest lap time done on the last lap.
Yes, and remember, of course, he's on fresh tyres now, and so he does have a bit of an edge over the boys who've done their 30-odd laps on their tyres.
Glenn Seaton, by comparison with that Gardner time of 15, now he's done a 15.4. Seaton more in the area of 15.8.
Yes, now Seaton had that brake problem earlier on that put him off. What that might be is, in fact, there are a number of problems. They can have the balance front to rear of their braking effort is incorrectly set. They can have pads that are not working properly. They can have glazing on the discs. They can have cooling that's not coming up properly. There are all sorts of permutations of problems. So they haven't been able to fix it other than to get Glenn out there and push through and see if he can't drive over the top of that problem.
One of the well-driven cars in the race will be that Mazda there. Gary Walden and also Colin Bond with him. And then the Falcon Tyres Mazda X, the Mazda Racing Team, car number 61. In good hands, Keith Carling, sports sedan specialist, and Kevin Burton, a production car specialist, normally running in a Falcon. But this car, Gary Walden really knows how to get round quickly. What'll be ruining a lot of his time is him having to get out of the way. He stays to the outside of the track. Follow your line. They know you would normally go there, so go there normally, and let the people following find their way around. Paul Morris, another off, and was in 7th place when it happened.
It's a problem.
And Paul Morris was pulling off the track, and yeah, Kevin Waldock
had to go round him.
And well seen and evaded and recovered by Waldock, and Morris for that matter too. Saw it late, but saw it fast enough, and Gardner, unfortunately for all those lap times, seems to feel that either the thing's not right or that there's no profit in the day, and certainly plenty of money to be saved by putting it away at this stage, because he knows that in the engine and the driveline he'll do a lot of wear and tear pre-Bathurst if he keeps going.
So this is the Larry Brock fight that's continuing on.
Wait for the lift. Here he can get on hard to the power again. Wait for it. There it comes.
Notice how Brock was quicker into the corners and Larry's quicker off the corners.
And watch for it on the straight. When's he get on the nail? Yes, Brock did a lot of good work around there. Made a lot of ground on LP. Perkins in 4th, Brock in 5th.
Not a lot of difference in total power, remembering Larry's coming off the corners quicker than is Peter, so Peter is possibly a little bit more powerful and able to hang on to him.
12.2 seconds from Perkins forward to the race leader. 12.56, so 0.34 of a second for Brock, looming up onto the back of the Castrol car. Castrol being chased by Mobil. Racing now for 48.5 minutes in the Sandown 500 as Peter Brock the man on pole position, surges past Larry Perkins and says, 4th place, thank you. Teammates to 3 Bathurst victories, also victory here in 1984, a fallout, gone their separate ways. 2 fairly similar Australians in many ways, both fairly down-to-earth sort of guys, relate with ordinary people, no real pretension at all. But Brock at the moment leading Perkins and pulling away quite quickly. To the tune of a 1 second gap since he got by. So 13.5 seconds back to Larry Perkins in 5th place. From the race leader, still John Bowe in car 17. From Alan Jones in car 30, Mark Scaife in car 2, the best of the Commodores, being led by 2 Falcons. Peter Brock in 4th place, Commodore. 5th place, Larry Perkins, Commodore. 6th place, Longhurst. 7th place, Win Percy, that he'll share with Russell Ingle, the Australian Formula Ford and now Formula 3 single-seater, and Formula Opel star over in Britain. He really goes extremely well. Alan Grice is 8th. Bob Jones is 9th in the Ampol car 12. And Greg Crick, Tony Scott. Don't forget them. 2 of the lesser runners in terms of glamour in the field and certainly in terms of budget, but in 10th place at this stage. And then it's Trimble, and Seaton is now up to 16th place as we come to Longhurst. In car number 25, 6th place.
But his times aren't good. He's travelling in the high 1 minute 16s, low 1 minute 17s, whereas the Johnson car and the Jones car are doing high 114s or 115. So there is a gap starting to appear just in the regular lap times between the first 4 cars and the rest.
Well, Bowe must have them really worried. He's just done a 14.81 again, and that really is honking. Alan Jones, by comparison, 15.34, 0.53 of a second in a lap, and on lap 40 as well. So Bowe is the star of the race at this stage. Mark Scaife, a 15.06. And Perkins out into the 16s, and down in the pits, Ian Campbell.
The unenviable title of the day goes to Brett Yulton. He's the first one behind the pit wall. Brett, what's the problem?
Well, yeah, I'm especially disappointed to hear that. First one behind pit wall. We've got a bit of a problem with the tail shaft. Look, it's only, it's obviously going to slow us down somewhat, but, really this race is a learning exercise for Bathurst. These cars do have a bit of a weak link in the tail shaft, and we're going to get it fixed, and we'll get Malcolm out there to get some valuable experience for Bathurst.
Back up to central commentary.
Well, Brett Yulton not enjoying his transition. There's Kent and Brett competing in the race. Kent is partnering Jan Lammers in the Volvo, but Brett is in one of the hot cars, and as you heard, tail shaft problems, as brother Kent in the Volvo motors by, and again all you hear is the whisper of the turbo. Once it was all you heard in a good silent car was the ticking of a clock, but you don't hear that these days. But in this Volvo, the 5-cylinder transverse engine car, the Triple M backed car, front wheel drive, where you hear the whining and the banging of the gearbox in the Group A cars, you just hear the nice little whistle of a turbo boosting in a whole pile of fuel, and the little 58-kilogram Dutchman, Jan Lammers, who's been in Formula One, who's been in World Championship sports cars, who's won at Le Mans, who's competed here in sports cars, a gentleman and a total professional, doing a tremendous job. Look at him, very neat and efficient. Good lines, just working it a little bit, sliding it out a little bit, but making sure that the natural understeer characteristic of the car is not excessive. And down in the pits is John Smales.
And regrettably, vying with Brett Yulton for the honour of being, or the dishonour of being the first behind the barrier, is Wayne Gardner. Wayne, you're very disappointed.
Yeah, very disappointed myself. I think I was fumbling around on the back straight trying to get a drink because it's very hot in the car, and I arrived at the corner, went to grab a gear and grabbed the wrong gear, and spun and hit the fence and broke the front steering arm.
You went for fourth, but got second.
Yeah, I went to go back a gear lower. It was a traffic cone, but I made a mistake and poked the wrong gear and spun and slid sideways and crunched into the Armco. There's no body damage, but it broke a front steering arm, and then we were 9 laps down, and I went back out, but the car's not steering quite right, so it's a little dangerous to keep continuing.
Well, Wayne Gardner, you're certainly building up to Bathurst a strange way.
Yeah, the cars are very good. The team was fantastic today and all weekend. I'm just very disappointed in myself, you know, for making such a silly mistake. It shouldn't have happened, and I'm going to be very hard on myself from now on.
Well, good on you for taking it on the chin anyway, Wayne. We look forward to seeing you at the mountain.
Thank you.
That's something you won't hear a lot of today, of drivers saying, I made a mistake. There are all sorts of things. All this broke and it only cost 20 cents and all this sort of stuff. Very few people will front the cameras and say, I made a mistake and I'm disappointed and I'm not going to do it again. And, you know, I'm going to be harder on myself. Good on you, Wayne Gardner. Good gutsy stuff. Brett Youlden in car 31, in fact, that was 17th fastest in the warm-up this morning, one of the VL Group A Commodores that with Wayne Gardner went out pretty early in the race. As we look at Trimble in car number 47. And Paul Morris, you saw pull off earlier. Well, he's faded down to 22nd place in the field. And as we sort out some of these cars coming out of the race, and we can list those for you too in very impressive form with our marvellous computer scoring system here. And at some stage we'll give you a run through of the cars that are out of the race. Not a lot of them officially listed at this stage, but there's the Wayne Gardner car number 4 and the Brett Youlden car number 31, and Paul Morris has pulled off in car number 23. And Trimble gone down the bottom there. And what you were saying about marbles on the outside of the track, Howard Marsden.
Exactly right, and he deserved that. He did not move over. He didn't make it easy for wind to come through until too late, onto the marbles, off and gone. No damage, just a little bit of a lesson. The Win Percy car is going very nicely, doing 16.5s regularly. Good to see.
Win Percy right up on Trimble there, and he's got everything locked up, and he's in the wrong section of track, and he had no hope. And he was off, not so much to the Daily Planet as to the next planet, into the pits too.
Bad for the heart, but let's go into the pits and fix the heart.
John Trimble, a character, he's got his own plane.
And he obviously has caught his pit crew on the hop. That wasn't a scheduled pit stop, so maybe he really did want to get out of the car.
Yes, he has his own plane and his own business. And he's a learning man in touring car racing, and he knows that. And he's just trying to pull it together as well as he can. Now 15.32 for John Bowe, who's been superbly impressive in this FAI Shell car for the Dick Johnson team. Ahead of Brad Jones by 5.7 seconds now. 45 laps completed, anything up to 10 before he does his first and scheduled pit stop. Mark Scaife is 7.66 seconds behind, so a further 2 seconds behind Alan Jones, and Scaife back in 3rd place. And I think Scaife and Fred Gibson would be a bit surprised by the pace. Well, they'll be surprised if the car keeps going.
That's exactly right. They've obviously made their decisions. They know what they want to do, and they're just running their own race from this position. The cars are now on lap 45, and we see them stopping, we believe, between laps 50 and 55. So within the next 5 to 10 laps, all the front-running cars are going to be into the pits. This time it should be just fuel, just tyres and just the driver, and straight back out again on new tyres and with a new driver. That will unsettle the front-running group and may change everything. As I say, watch for this between 5 and 10 laps.
And Glenn Seaton's 2 cars in close company there, but in very different situations in the race. With Alan Jones in car 30, as you can see, 5.7 seconds behind the race leader, John Bowe, fellow Falcon runner. And in car number 1 in 15th place is Glenn Seaton, 2 laps down, and the 5.7 seconds forward, 2 laps and say 6 seconds behind the race leader, and not in the situation Glenn Seaton in car 1, as you can see by the fact that cars 1 and 2 in the field have gone by, to pull back even one of those 2 laps at this stage and to get on to 1 lap behind and a minute 15 to make up before you get onto the same lap as the leaders. It's a gigantic task.
Mind you, very early in the race we're going to see a lot more surprises yet, and young Glenn staying with it could come up into quite a reasonable position, but still not happy with things. The car's going reasonably well. He can hang on to the back of Alan Jones, so maybe he's learnt to live with his brake problem.
And here comes the man that he sparred with through the season and handed his touring car title over to, and that's Mark Scaife coming through. So have a look at the current placings at this stage. There they are with 6.7 seconds back to second place, 8.97 back to third place, and as you can see further down in the field, the situation that doesn't include Glenn Seaton until we get down there to 12th, 15th place, and that takes us through to 18th. And come aboard. Glenn Seaton. Do you wonder, Howard, when you see him talking like that, whether he's doing too much, whether he's thinking as much about the team's strategy and how the other car's going and so on, as about trying to get car 1 as far forward as possible?
Yes, that is interesting. He's also got a fair amount of understeer on that car. He took a lot of lock on that particular corner. He's basically not happy with the car or with himself, and I think he's just going to have to keep motoring as well as he can. It
was a very hard smack he gave it. If he'd hit at any other angle, but fairly flush along the side of the car, he could well have bent a corner so much that he wouldn't have been able to continue. But look at him catching Alan Jones, man second in the race. And it is critical that he really tries to stay as close to these people, because as you say, there's no question of a driver of the calibre of Glenn Seaton to be backed up by Paul Radisich in a car as well prepared as these Peter Jackson cars are, that he's not going to pull forward a lot of placings in the race. And Gary Walden there in the Mazda, very much the master of the situation. With the Porsche 968, Stephen Richards just in front of it on the track, and in fact leading at 19th and 20th outright. They are 7 laps down on the leaders in 48 laps completed, so every 7 laps they're being lapped. But the production car category class, a massive lock-up for Alan Jones there. The production car category being led by the Porsche 968 CS of Stephen Richards, ahead of Gary Walden in the Mazda RX-7. Here in second place and 15th place are the 2 Glenn Seaton team cars. And as I said before, the man that took the title from the man in car number 1, Glenn Seaton, handed it over to Mark Scaife, of Australian Touring Car Champion, a title that was first raced for in 1960 on a streets on the outskirts of Orange called the Nublar Circuit, which I drove to after the Bathurst meeting to see the race, and won by David Mackay in the Jaguar. But now the deposed Australian Touring Car Champion, less than half the age of the first Australian Touring Car Champion, David Mackay, must now be well in his 60s, and back in Australia after quite some years sojourning in Europe. And Scaife saying, "Excuse me, Glenn, I'd like to come by, but I'm not going to risk tucking my nose in there, albeit that you're in 15th place." Glenn won't be giving away that much. Scaife wants to get by, he's welcome, but he's got to get a tad closer than that. He's not welcome to go by, but he's allowed to go by. Jones, as he hooks up to come along the straight now, is more than 8 seconds in arrears to John Bowe, and it just highlights again the sort of work Bowe's been doing. Now 50 laps completed, a 15.84, a 15.64 for Alan Jones just on the laps just completed, a 16.06 for Scaife, a 15.09 for Brock, a 15.1 for Peter Brock. So something to do with traffic, of course, and indeed there we see that on this lap, with the faster lap time that we just gave you, that the gap between the leader and second place has diminished down to 8 seconds. But nevertheless, a very hard-earned 8 seconds, particularly considering that he came from 15th place, as this dice is very much on between Glenn Seaton in 15th but in car 1, and trying to stay with the leaders and probably to motivate himself up to the same sort of pace as much as anything else, and to say to Mark Scaife, listen mate, I want to stay here because of my position, but I also want to protect my second place teammate in the race, Alan Jones.
Now they've just completed 50 laps on the 51st now. The tyres will be getting tired. You know that there's a battle that goes on, not only Falcon against Commodore, but also the Yokohama, Bridgestone and Dunlop battle.
And the Shell Team car that just came out of the pits was car 18, as we can clearly see, and just had their first pit stop, as is often the case. They bring the second car in first, see how it's gone on fuel and get it out of the way. And car 18 is in 13th place now, Alan Grice.
And young Steve
Johnson, indeed.
So yeah, that's quite a usual thing. Pull the second car in, settle down the pit crew, have a look at the cars, have a look at the tyre wear, decide whether they're going to stay on the same compound for the leading car. Lots of good information comes out of doing it that particular way. But you must start now to expect all of the front-running cars into the pits over the next 2 or 3 laps, and it'll be interesting to see who comes out first and who can maintain their position.
Peter Brock tucked in tightly there, in 4th place still, 13.8 seconds behind the race leader. Sounds a lot, and it's a nice little margin for the race leader John Bower to have, but in the reality of a 500-kilometre race at Sandown, that right to the very end of it has often seen all sorts of weird and untoward problems emerge. It doesn't count for an enormous amount. It's worth something, but it doesn't count for an enormous amount. And if this were the tail end of the race, you'd see that 13 seconds being attacked by such as Glenn Seaton and by Mark Scaife and by Peter Brock, and there'd be a chase on that wouldn't be resolved until they got to the finishing line. But at the moment, they're settling in. They know they're heading, as Howard Marsden was saying, they're heading for their first pit stop fairly soon. It's a matter really of having established these placings, settle the car down now, don't sort of overwork it, get it in and get some new equipment onto it, tyres and refuel, drivers in, and then we'll start another arguing and sorting out process in the second of what will be 3 stages of the race.
Exactly, 54 to 55 lap races, and let's go and talk to Ian in the pits.
Alan Grice has just done the quick changeover with Stephen Johnson down here in the number 18 car. We'll be talking to him shortly. They did have a slight hiccup on one side, changing over pads. It's been a complete service, but they're very, very happy at the moment. So the second of the Johnson car is due in about 1 lap's time.
And the one that was in came back out in 13th place, and you can see them tentatively just checking brakes. Stephen Johnson has been doing a grand job in very limited amount of travel in these big threatening cars, which certainly have 550 horsepower. Talking to Charlie O'Brien in a taxi from the airport on Thursday, he said, I reckon they might have around 590 myself. And he said they're rev limited, of course, to 7,500 revs. Allegations, always suspicions from other teams whenever a team goes fast, that some haven't had their rev limiter working. And his car, for instance, his NASCAR, by going to 8,500 revs on carburetors, has 714 horsepower. So if a car were able to get another 500 revs, it would do 2 things. It'd pick up some top-end power, but it'd pull them back when they come down in the gear change to a much stronger section of the band, of the power band. And as we see in the pits now, car number 17, the race leader till this moment, John Bower, handing over to Dick Johnson. What a grand job done by John Bower, settling now the team chief into the car, with Bower to do a double stint.
The fuel's in, the drivers are changed, and they've gone for a pad change. I'm very surprised about that. Obviously they got information off their second car that they have got a problem with their brakes. Now they're actually having to push back the calipers so they can get the pads out, put new ones in. This is going to cost them very badly, because I know some of the other teams are not expecting to have to make their change until the second of the runs, the second of the pit stops. If they've had to change this quickly, they've got 2 more lots of 50-plus races to do, and they may well have to do another pad change if they keep this sort of pressure up.
This circuit much more sensitive, or harder on brake pads, on transmissions, drive lines, but also on tyres. And we'll talk about the tyre battle shortly.
The important thing here is we've seen John Bowe really push this car much harder, nearly 2 to 3 tenths of a second faster than everybody else, as everybody else being smarter in looking after their brakes better than that car.
And now second place car that inherited the race lead, Alan Jones into the pits. He slipped automatically to second place. Mark Scaife is the new race leader in car number 2, so that the order is Scaife from Jones, from Brock in third place 05, Perkins is fourth in 11, yet to pit obviously, and then as they come by the pits it's Scaife from Perkins, from Alan Jones, from Brock, Longhurst, Percy, Dick Johnson, Bob Jones, Brad Jones in 9th place, and Longhurst now is third in car number 25.
They've got the passenger door open. They're doing something in there with the inside of the car. I'm not sure what's going on. It's a bad problem. They've got to stay like that. They're getting waved out by the driver.
And Brock has gone to 4th, so he must be in the pits too, because Tony Longhurst is ahead of him in car number 25. So real flood of the race leaders. Scaife from Perkins from Longhurst now, 2 from 11 from 25. Brock in 4th place, but we check it off when he comes past the start-finish line in 05. Alan Jones, David Parsons, 5th in car 30. Win Percy Russell Ingalls 6th in 7 and 17. The race leader now in 7th place as the new and previous, soon-to-be previous race leader 2. Mark Scaife into the pits to hand over to Jim Richards.
Neither of the Falcons have done a good stop. It's an opportunity here for the Commodores to get through. I think that what they're playing about with in the lead Falcon was from Glenn Seaton's team, in fact, was just the drink, and that's been a bad mistake.
So Larry Perkins is now the race leader from Tony Longhurst, 11 from 25.
Fueling is the slowest thing, and that's the way it should be under these regulations. Good, slick run from there. That should put that Commodore back into the lead.
Seen what high pressure fueling does when people try to make it part of a motor race. And what a frightening and nearly very sad situation it was. And Benetton went up in an absolute fireball.
See, Jim really having to work at the wheel. His tyres are cold, and he's lucky to have got out just ahead of the slower car behind him, but he's really having to hang on to the wheel until, there you go, a bit of a lock-up, everything's cold, got to hold his position. 2 more laps and he'll be quite all right, but this is the time when they can make the most mistakes, because the car's just not handling the way it should.
Glenn Seaton at the moment is 12th, then he's suddenly 11th. Now, this is the situation. He's out of sync with the others, and he's going to pick up a few places here as the others do the stop that was forced on him. And there you see the 05 car, Peter Brock. 3rd place at the moment. Larry Perkins was the new race leader in car number 11, but in to hand over to Greg Hansford. So Larry out. Former runner-up in the World 250 motorcycle champion Greg Hansford, and twice third in the World 350cc motorcycle championship. Winner of 10 World Championship Grand Prix, Greg Hansford, into the car, doing a stunning job last year for Larry Perkins to take them to victory in the Tooheys 1000 at Bathurst. And a good, quick stop. That's the way to do it. So that Tony Longhurst is now the race leader in 25 until he pits from Peter Brock in 05. Mark Scaife, 3rd in 2. Larry Perkins is 4th in 11. Now Greg Hansford. 5th is Alan Jones in 30. 6th in car 7 is Win Percy. 7th from leading the race, but a very long pit stop, and it doesn't do you much use to have an 8-second lead if you have a long pit stop, and you fall back to 7th place. with Dick Johnson now at the wheel of 17 from Bob Jones in 12. Glenn Seaton 9th now, as he keeps jumping forward as people in front of him pit. And there, Kevin Waldock's car that he's sharing with Mike Preston, the Playscape Racing car. And here, the man that was leading the race till now, Tony Longhurst. We must have had 6 or 7 race leaders of different types, and about 4 of them actually raced for out on the track, several of them coming about by virtue of some of the front runners having slightly earlier pit stops than such as Tony Longhurst in car number 25. So this will
another
put
brake change there.
And it might put the race leader, or sorry, the lead in the hands of the Sandown hero, Peter Brock. And down in the pits with Alan Grice is Ian Cameron.
Thanks, Will. Alan, you've come in, you've done your driver change, but you did a pad change too. Was that scheduled?
Yes, it was. Everybody's going to have to change a set of pads during the day. We've chosen to do it at the first stop because that way it's faster to change. The pistons don't come out of the caliper as much, so you can old pads out, new pads in, you can do it much quicker.
A lot of traffic on the road out there. What's Stephen got to expect in the car?
A lot of traffic. He's got to look after the tyres a bit, he's got to look after the brakes a bit, and watch the traffic. There's some very, very slow traffic. I think there's about 48 Volvos in the race. There's about 36 Mazda 626s and about 400 small Commodores. That's the way. That's how many it seemed anyway.
It's been a long while since you've been in a Group A race such as this. How's it feel?
Oh, it's good. The Ford is a very good car to drive. It's probably superior, I think, in the front to the Commodore, and in the rear you've got to sort of look after the rear of it. But all in all, they're just motor cars. They all turn left when you turn the steering wheel. They all stop when you put your foot on that set of pedal.
Alan Grice out for his first stint.
Some politicians come to motor races to be seen. One of them comes to race. Alan Grice, MP, are up there at Broadwater, and we saw car 7 too. The second and the lone surviving Coca-Cola team car win, Percy Russell Ingle. They're 7th in car 7 at the moment, in a race now being led by Thomas Mazera in car 05, taking over from Peter Brock, from Jim Richards now at the helm of car 2, which is 7.14 seconds behind. Greg Hansford is in 3rd place in car number 11, who's 20 seconds behind. David Parsons is 4th in the Alan Jones car number 30. And gracious, my lap score's gone all over the place, so
Yes, I think we just let the race settle down, and then we can pick up on the various positions once all the heroes have been through the pit stop.
So this is the car that Peter Brock put on pole position yesterday. It's a brand new car, and this is the significant part of it. And as I was going to say earlier, and as the chart comes back to us, Scaife now in the hands of Richards in car number 2, from Parsons in 30, from Mazera in 05. They were just clearing the screen while all the different placings were resorted, and the race lead is okay. So the computer's doing a bit of catching up, so we won't say anything hard and fast at this stage. But the tyre situation, Howard Marsden, is interesting because Dunlop, which, oh dear, and car number 16, the Australian boat manufacturers, is looking a little bit like a boat at the moment. Graham Blythman and Stephen Renshaw, VP Holden Commodore, and that is indeed their day. Fairly straight sort of accident on a slow corner, locked up, gone wide, coming in too fast, and about to get barreled as he proves to be a slightly over-anxious pedestrian. Bad luck.
Well, the race is now settling back down again into its second phase of 55 laps for the cars in the front. But the thing that has been remarkable has been the lack of contact between the cars. There have been no pace cars out yet, despite what we all expected. And so we're getting a good, clean race from that side of the business. So the race at the moment is being won and lost in the pits. The tactic that the Johnson team picked up, which is to change their brake pads early, is based on the fact it is easier to change your pads when they've still got a lot of meat on them, as was said before. The downside is by the time you get to the end of the race, 150 laps, you can possibly have a very bad brake pedal, and if there's a sprint at the end, it may hurt them from that side.
We haven't, of course, seen any of the production cars in yet, one being that they haven't obviously covered anywhere near as many laps as the lead cars, but two. They don't use fuel at anything like the same sort of rate. And they'll be very easy in terms of their pit stops. They're not expecting to do anything in terms of brakes and very much in terms of tyres, although by virtue of being there they might just put some on. But Thomas Mazira, the man who was leading the Holden race team as driver until the re-emergence and the remarriage of Peter Brock with the Holden factory a little while ago, and a controversial parting from the factory over the matter of his polarizer, and then a slightly less controversial rejoining, but there were nevertheless probably still some people at Holden who were probably against Brock coming back to the family, but he certainly worked well for them. He won the Eastern Creek round of the Touring Car Championship, and that gave the Holden racing team their first ever victory in a round of the Touring Car Championship. Brock's first for a while, and it certainly is a revitalised Peter Brock, and some say a threatened Thomas Mazira. A very hard-charging man is the Czech who started his career hill climbing a Skoda. Oh! And he's in big trouble, and he just saves it back onto the track, and you saw it all happen there. We'll no doubt see it again, and he was just forced out, and although it was the car in front, and I think it was Bob Jones who certainly had right of way and had track, it would have been a reasonably gentlemanly thing to have given that faster car enough space to come by. The pace car is out. Now the pace car's onto the track on lap 63. Have a look at this again, up over the back. The car that's leading the race, Thomas Mazira, talking about the threat to him. He's run out wide by a driver not looking to see that there was a car out there. You shouldn't move over when there's a car there. And boy, Mazira did very well finally to keep it out of that sand trap. Ooh, dear oh me. And Peter Brock back in the pits will no doubt be saying, oh, what have you got to do?
I hope he hasn't flat spotted his front tyres.
So this is the race lead car, or it was. It's now gone back to second place under the pace car because, according to our lap chart here, wait till they come by, Mark Scaife, Jim Richards now at the helm of car number 2, that produces a rash of pit stops. Well, it won't produce a rash, but it certainly does for Glenn Seaton, and Seaton is 9th at this stage, and so that quick pit stop under a pace car condition
that would help.
Suited him enormously.
But there is a mistake here. They've actually picked up the wrong car. They picked up the car that's running in second place, Mazira, and Scaife, who's in the lead of the car, the lead of the race. In fact, is getting a clear run round. So they're going to have to try and unravel that one in some way.
They have. So here's the update at this stage, and racing for 1 hour 20 minutes, as you can see, the gap first to second is that bare bit of a second, with Thomas Mazira in 05, Greg Hansford now in 11, David Parsons now in 30, Dick Johnson now in 17 in 5th place, and from being 1-2 in the race, Falcons have become 4-5, led by 3 Commodores. And that's the situation at the moment in the Sandown 500. So, pace car still leading the field in the order of race leader. Mark Scaife in car 2. Jim Richards now, of course, at the helm of that car, as Thomas Mazira is at the helm of 05. And the gaps don't matter at this stage. They're all gathered together. Have a look at them. In 3rd place, Larry Perkins in car number 11. That's the Larry Perkins car. Greg Hansford at the wheel. David Parsons at the wheel of 30. John Bowers handed over to Dick Johnson. So Johnson heads car 17 in 5th. Then it's Longhurst in 25. Charlie O'Brien now at the helm of that one. And in car 7, Russell Ingle, the single-seater star, who's been resident in England for about 4 years. Alan Grice has handed over to Junior Johnson, young Stephen. In car 18, it's in 8th place. And then Bradley Jones is in 9th place. And Glenn Seaton now with Paul Radicic at the wheel, and having, during the pace car time, made its second pit stop. Car number 1 is in 10th place, and the Mazda in the production car class, Gary Walden has come in and presumably handed over to Colin Bond by taking advantage of the pace car period. As Paul Morris's Diet Coke car comes to the pits, you can see the smack on his car. A fairly solid one with a bit of body damage, and the other car that was removed from over the old Peters Corner there, where Sir Gawain Bailey, no, Lex Davison punched the big Galaxy, 7-litre Galaxy, through the fence there when the brakes failed and headed for the little weir that's down behind there.
This particular run we're having at the moment has made no difference to the overall tactics of the race, because all of the lead cars, in fact, had just refueled and retired. So the only person that got any gains out of it is Glenn Seaton, but he still is a lap behind everybody else. And the Mazda was very smart to get in and do its pit stop and get back out whilst the pace car was on. So nothing's really changed overall, other than the cars have been bunched up. They've been bunched up some 5 to 10 laps after they did their major pit stop. So we're back into a very serious motor race with everybody starting again.
1 hour, 28.5 minutes of racing completed, 65 laps covered, about to become 66 as they trickle across the start-finish line, and Murray Carter comes into the pits and out in car number 19. And the lights are out in the pace car, so it's another 3 kilometres, 3.1 full lap distance around Sandown before they come under full-blooded racing again. And the Sandown 500 resumes in all its fury, and there is some fury still to come, because we've got Jim Richards leading the race in car number 2. We've seen that car go back as far as 4th place, but the race falling into a different period now. Different people in the cars. John Bowe no longer, and out of the race as we see our list come up. Wayne Gardner, Neil Crompton on lap 27, the Coca-Cola racing car with the broken steering arm that they told you of on lap 29. The Brett Youlden car, the tail shaft problem that had it wheeled in the Holden Commodore VL to the back of the pits. Paul Morris, Diet Coke Racing, you've seen it just come in. That Jeff Brabham, who won the race last year, didn't even get to the helm this time. So 3 of them officially out. Man to strike trouble early in the race, who had real braking problems with Glenn Seaton in car number 1, and has handed over to Paul Radicic. And Radicic is one of the people we're delighted to see come join us from overseas, because he's one of the world's great touring car drivers, and indeed to be given a Formula 1 tryout very shortly in some Ford-powered car because of his Ford Mondeo connections in touring car racing. But down in the pits with information from there, and there's plenty happening, John Smales.
And Paul Morris has had 20-odd laps to cool down after being stranded on the circuit. Paul, what happened?
Oh, we just come down the end of the straight and went to go back a couple of gears and just lost all power to the engine. It turns over all right on the battery, but no ignition. So I tried a few things when I was out there over the radio. The boys told me what to do, but lucky enough we've been able to get it back here and hopefully get it out there.
2 problems. You've got Jeff Brabham now, who leads a drive, doesn't he? It's going to be good for you, Matt.
That's right. So we're going to try and get the car going, get him out there and get him some miles so he didn't come all the way from America for nothing. So
the second thing is you were pushing that car to its absolute limit in those opening laps.
Yeah, for sure. So rather having it here than at the mountain in a couple of weeks' time.
Weren't concerned that you're pushing it a bit too hard, Paul?
No, it was an electrical problem, so nothing to do with the way we were driving the car. It's a little fault somewhere that's just wrecked the race for us, but hopefully we'll get it sorted out and get back out there.
As the field resumes racing with car 2, Jim Richards leading from Thomas Mazira in car 05. Larry Perkins is the man in 3rd place, or it's Greg Hansford in 11, and he's been given a lot of hurry up at the moment as they go up the back straight. Alan Jones got car 30 into a very good position early, leading the race, but then coming in 2nd. And David Parsons is at the wheel of that, and he'll probably be one of the slower of the lead 2nd drivers.
The interesting things come out of this particular pace car episode is, in fact, the Johnson-Bowe car. They made a very bad stop on their pads, their brake pads, and they were lucky enough to be able to close right up. So suddenly, instead of being 30 seconds off, here they are, again with an opportunity to push for the lead. They've got the fresh pads in, and if they can get the pads from here all the way through the race meeting, suddenly they've had a nice drop.
Yes, well, in fact, they've headed Greg Hansford. As you can see, he was 20 seconds behind. They were more than that. And let's have a look at the situation as they now come through, and it's fairly different indeed. Jim Richards from Thomas Mazira from Parsons, from Johnson into 4th place, Hansford into 5th, Charlie O'Brien 6th in 25, and 7 is still 7th. There you see it. And in fact, car 17 is behind it. Now there's 68 laps covered by the leading 6 at this stage. And it's 1 lap down to Russell Ingall in car 7, which is why it's heading car number 17.
Or it was.
And that was a little bit over-daring, I'd have said, on Russell Ingall's part. But he's still daring. And this is a flurry. Hansford's had his nose cut off. Not literally, but figuratively. And he just ducked the Castrol car out of the way. And yes, blue smoke.
He must have touched. There's something, yes, the rear wheel. Oh, that's very bad luck, in fact, for Dickie Johnson, having had the luck of the pace car go his particular way. He's just been touched in the back there, and I don't know how serious that one is on the damage that's been done. That's interesting.
So, the leading 6 cars: 2, Jim Richards; 05, Mazira; 30, David Parsons; 17, Dick Johnson; 11, Greg Hansford; and 25, Charlie O'Brien, are all on the same lap and only 11 seconds apart, the top 6, but it's then 1 lap down, that big gap that you see to car 7 in 7th place. Russell Ingall from 18 in 8th place, Stephen Johnson 9th, and these are all 1 lap down, is Brad Jones, and then it's Radicic in car number 1 in 10th place. Now he's only 1 lap down, and he was 2, so he's recovered 1. So situation certainly changing, and that pace car period changing the whole structure of the race for the top 6 people, and they quite obviously are the top 6 contenders at this stage. 70 laps completed as they storm down the straight in front of the big grandstand here. The weather's still holding off, the sky grey, a whole ceiling of cloud over the track, but no threat of, well, no likelihood, it seems at this stage, of rain actually falling. It's a fairly high ceiling of cloud. And there you see 7th place car number 7 with Russell Ingall at the wheel, that was getting into that contretemps with Dick Johnson and with Greg Hansford. Greg Hansford in car 11's in 5th place. Car 7, a lap down, is of course 2 places further back, but fighting and arguing. So still this real thorn in the side of a couple of the cars on the lead lap. It was Dick Johnson in 17 who was caught up by it and finding life difficult. It's now Greg Hansford in 11, and it wouldn't be suiting Greg Hansford at all. But Russell Ingall is a hard racer, and he lives and earns his money in a very different environment to the one here. This is, for all that it's very hard and very quick and very competitive, it's more man eat man over there, dog eat dog, and Russell Ingall showed that then, when with no thought to reputations at all, for all his minute experience in these sorts of cars, he was arguing with Dick Johnson, and he's still arguing with Greg Hansford. As you see here, Hansford, 5th place, wants to get by a car that's a lap behind him.
It's interesting. Ingall, with his single-seater experience, is not happy with the brakes on the touring car, and he's just giving it a little bit of a flick before he gets to the corner to make sure that it's there.
Yeah. These would be diabolical by comparison with what he's used to.
That's right.
in what he's used to, you get to about the 100-metre mark and you jump on them and you feel this brick-like thing under you, and the car, you feel as though you've run into a very strong bungee cord, a bit like the one on aircraft carriers.
But he's looking for that confidence to have, are the brakes still there? Am I going to stop this time? And then through the corner.
And Greg Hansford's frustrated because in 5th place, he's losing time to 4 cars that he wants to stick with. And now he's got him. And that took some work. Look, he's very busy. Lots of minute adjustment. He had to earn that, and it was hard. Larry Perkins would be proud of him because Larry has great confidence. He said, no, just let him take over the car. Don't worry, it's not in my hands. And he has, in fact, enormous faith in Greg Hansford. He said, if I couldn't got him for this year, I don't know who I'd have got. And after the 12-hour at Bathurst, he said to Greg, last year, I want you for this year. And he followed up very quickly after their victory and said, I'd love to see you back. But look at Russell Ingall, Howard Marsden, and it does show, doesn't it, the hardness that gets into you when you race so many more times against so many more people when you get over into that field, really the headquarters of motor racing, which is England.
Yeah, he's doing a fine job of settling down into what really are large and heavy cars. These cars weigh in at 1,300 kilograms. They've got the 550 plus horsepower in them. The tyres are not so large for that sort of weight and power balance, and he's settling down nicely, and as you said, good, intelligent, aggressive stuff.
And with us now up in the commentary box, we have the managing editor of the most recent Motorsport magazine onto the market, a fortnightly that keeps everybody up to date with what goes on, Motorsport News. Chris Lambden, who's not so long out of touring cars himself, but Chris, the situation close to the teams, how do you see the race situation as it is at the moment?
Well, certainly that pace car period has changed the complexion of the race. It's I suppose you'd say rescued the race for the Shell team.
Is this nice and redolent for you of what it was like being in the car? Because the hammering and the violence and the clanking and banging that goes on is quite sensational.
No, indeed. Hansford is very fresh in the car. Still does take 10 or 12 laps to actually get yourself into the groove, and having to deal with a lap car that really did get in his way. Something you don't really want to have to deal with at this stage. But you can see he's settling in now, and you know, his job is to look after this car until the next period of pit stops when Larry Perkins will get back in the car.
So Hansford doing a good job though, because he managed to look after the car in doing it. Chris, the tyre war's an interesting one, Dunlop and Bridgestone and Yokohama, and there's a dry weather sort of relationship between them, and there's a wet weather one as well.
Well, yes indeed. I suppose again the surprise for the day is the performance of John Bowles Dunlops in that first stint. Normally they're not considered quite the long distance durable tyre, but they held on so well that it really has now leaves the race entirely wide open. There's very, very little between the tyres.
That was a stunning stint by Bow, didn't you think? I mean, very quick and hard.
Well, fantastic from where he started on the grid. You know, I mean, Dick did exactly the right thing by putting Bow in the car. He is a charger, and he did everything correctly. And as I said, they muffed it a bit with that brake pad change, but you know, they're right back in it. There's one of the most consistent privateers around at the moment, Don Watson. He's running in 16th place at the moment. Very, very consistent member of the privateer sect, and indeed the privateer battle at the moment is going on in 10th and 11th place between the Greg Crick car and the Bob Jones car. They haven't been more than 30 metres apart for the entire distance so far. I mean, they're actually scraping guards and carrying on, and that's a hell of a contest back there.
Don Watson runs a refrigerated transport between major capitals, Sydney, Melbourne and others, something like 35 trucks, and many of them Mercedes-Benz, hence the badge proudly worn on the overalls of their very nicely turned out team.
Indeed, Don's actually a relatively recent arrival on the touring car scene, and has just got better and better. And I must say, I think it was the penultimate Shell Series round. He was actually the top privateer, won both heats in privateer terms, and you know, certainly a top operator.
He's doing a great job. Here's the Kevin Waldock car, but also the Mazda of Gary Walden and Colin Bond, and that car was battling in the production class, was leading it, fell back out of the lead, at one stage with the Porsche 968 of Stephen Richards getting up ahead of it. But as we come to the aerial shot now, you were talking of Bob Jones, and there he goes in the Ampol Max car.
Indeed, Bob actually took out the Privateer Cup that we indeed co-sponsor with Dunlop in the Shell Series, and he and the Greg Crick have been at it hammer and tongs throughout this entire race. And I think as you look at the Max 3 car coming onto the straight, you might see the next car up the road. Yes, there it is. It's the Greg Crick car in front of him, actually being driven at the moment by Tony Scott. They've really not been more than a few metres apart throughout.
And there the other production car, 9, is in 19th place, and this is Neville Crichton's BMW M3 that's been... no, I don't think it's pitted yet. No, that's... So Mark Brame to get into that car.
That's their big hope, you know, because the RX-7s are quite thirsty and they're expecting 3 stops, whereas Neville Crichton actually thinks they'll get through on 1 stop with the BMW, so...
It's marginal, very. But they're hoping, as you say, to do that. The other thing, though, that's been upsetting them is that they've been very hard on their brakes, and they've had a couple of warped discs and getting a lot of vibration under heavy braking. But you'll probably find that Neville Crichton in the car won't encounter the problem, and Mark Brame in the next session going quicker, working them harder, may.
Yes,
so
indeed.
Worth watching. So that car, number 9, in 19th place at the moment, is second in the production class being led by car 34 Stephen Richards in the Porsche 968 CS, with Colin Bond after 1 pit stop in the Mazda. It's in 20th place outright, so 18th, 19th and 20th are the 3 leading production cars, and not that far apart either, and with some different scenarios to come, particularly with Mark Brame, the little Suzuki GTI punter that won that 6-hour race at Winton outright with Henry Draper, and then went so well, has gone so well, gosh, every year at the James Hardy 12-hour. He's been the outstanding performer, not only in winning his class for up to 1600cc cars with a 1300cc car. In fact, it went out to 2 litres this year, and he still knocked them all off. And on top of that, he's come into the most amazing outright places. He really is a very good steerer.